you for having me on.
It's a real pleasure. I mean, I've been watching what you've been doing from afar, and
well, not that far, Kentish Town, babe.
Well, I know, but you know, I've seen I watched one of your talks with your team the other day when you said it wasn't feeding my soul anymore. You know, I've had a year where I've been trying to work out how I fit in the fashion system, and it's the only way is to turn my back on it.
Yeah.
But yet embrace it in a completely new way, which you've been doing for years. And you know, I'm just beginning to see, you know, I've seen what you've achieved and what you're doing and how long it takes and what you've had to learn and where you've gone with yourself. And I'm just incredibly impressed. And also, I have someone living with me who's doing a master's in environmental policy. So I've begun to understand through her work how you can implement change. We can't implement change in the fashion industry without you and MPs making change. So that's why I wanted to talk to you today. This will be recorded and shared. So actually it's great that we can just have this conversation, because there's so many things nobody really understands how it works. You do, because you went inside, you went undercover. And not you did. You gave, you know, you transitioned from being in the fashion industry and you went undercover in Parliament. I mean, you know, that's how Fashion Roundtable came into existence. You went to work with Sharon Hodgson 4 days a week.
Yeah.
As an assistant. Was it an assistant?
I went in. She was my mentor on a mentoring scheme to get women into frontline politics, and it's a brilliant scheme. It's got a really long name. It's the Fabian Women's Network Mentoring Scheme. I mean, they need to get a funky acronym because it's really long. Doesn't roll off the tongue, and it's now just started cohort 10. I was part of cohort 5, and what had happened was during the election that Ed Miliband lost, I was already a Labour Party member. I wasn't particularly active. I was living near you in Gospel Oak. I had a young son. I was locally active rather than politically active. I was invited to hear him speak. I actually thought he spoke a lot of sense. I noticed a disconnect between how he was being portrayed in the mainstream media and what I was seeing, which was really quite impressive at these meetings that I was going to. And then during that election where he lost, and we had instead of a coalition, we had a Tory majority government. I knew that meant a Brexit vote, because that's what Cameron had said he would do, thinking he would win a Remain campaign, because he seemed to think that he would. And I knew what that could mean to local communities, such as the community at that time I'd been living in Gospel Oak, which is not that far from where you live, but is a very different economically challenged area, which is actually under attack, as are a lot of these areas which have been pushed into the margins, such as the Grenville estate, where the tragedy happened a few years ago in Notting Hill. So having grown up in a similar area and seen the disconnect between what I'd grown up in and what I saw in that area now in London, having a son and realizing the economic challenges of having a child and a career at the same time. My son was actually at a nursery near where you live, and it was a Sure Start that had been closed by that government and then had reopened as a charity. I just was like, it was really difficult even to afford to work. So my career was being really challenged. It was something I'd given a lot of my life to, and I felt really aggrieved that I felt that I'd combated the class system and, to a level, my own experiences of racism, to have an okay career in the fashion industry, and I'd achieved a lot of the goals that I'd set myself, but I couldn't beat that. I couldn't beat structures. So when I was asked by somebody to consider applying, I took it really seriously. I went to everything. I threw myself into it, and then my mentor offered me a role, which was the first time that happened, and I thought, do you know what, I'm at a crossroads. I'm not going to go to W. I'm not going to go to that main dream of like being this high-end New York fashion stylist. So what am I going to do? I've got a kid here. I've got a husband who's in the film industry. He's always working. So I've got to think, where do I want to be? At that time, I didn't even know that I was going to do what I did, but I went in. It was a very different experience. I wasn't my own boss. I was used to having a taxi come to pick me up to go to a job, being treated really well. It was very different. I was in an office.
You wanted to be an MP, didn't you? That was your objective at that time.
I thought so. Yeah, I thought so. I was definitely. I became the women's officer, the I had another woman with me, but I was the women's officer here for the local Labour Party, where I moved to, which is Hornsey Wood Green, and I did a lot of events. Suddenly I was doing loads of events. Then I was working for Sharon, and then I set up something called Glass Ceiling, Not Glass Slipper, which was my way of starting these conversations, but it was more about all these kind of empowerment policies. So looking at housing, education, Islamophobia, and bringing Fabian women into, because I had this access to Parliament, I had room availability, I could literally book a room and have talks. And then...
At what point did you realise that the fashion industry was grossly underrepresented and that the system that fashion exists within is unsustainable, not diverse, and is not being heard in Parliament? When did that penny drop?
I think well, I was obsessed with the Brexit issue. I remain very, very emotionally involved with that and strategically involved with that because the policies aren't adding up. I was going to all the Brexit events that I could at Parliament because I had a pass, so I could go to everything on my own time between my office hours. And there was a moment when Hilary Benn, who is the chair of the Brexit Select Committee, was being interviewed by Tim Shipman from the Sunday Times.
Yeah.
And that was the moment where I basically put my hand up and asked a question, which is what the scheme trains women to do, because women don't generally ask. I was the only woman that asked a question.
What was the question?
My question was, what were they going to do for the creative industries? And then he guessed looking at me because, of course, I was in a nice jacket and a bit of a, you know, I mean, it was dressed my idea of office wear, but it was my idea of office wear. And then I went up to him and I said, look, I actually work here part time. Can I bring some people together? So I did that. And we had lots of people in the room and they were really angry and they felt unheard and undervalued. And they were really angry about the fact that the decisions were being made by people who had not heard their challenges. So Matt Hancock at the time was the Minister for Culture. He's now Health Secretary. He came, Hillary came. There were loads of people in the room. The shadow Culture Minister came.
You had a wide range of fashion people as well.
And I had from Nick Knight to Netta Porter to Browns to everybody that I could get hold of. Basically, the BFC, UKFT came, and I basically brought them together because I felt it was my duty. Now I had this gateway role to bring my community in, and I realized more I was in Parliament was that I am from the fashion community. It is the world that I've lived in for most of my adult life. I can say, oh yes, this happened or that happened. I think honestly on merit it treated me quite well.
Up to a point, and then
there's nowhere to
go. Yeah.
I also felt that unless you want to go to that, the kind of like the dream of New York, big city, in England in particular, it's quite a difficult market because it doesn't have enough money in the UK market, which is why Brexit's so important. To make money just from being a UK stylist, it just doesn't. There is just not enough money for a freelance. And even the people on the masthead at a magazine are now having to go freelance because of digital, and they're having to reinterpret themselves as Instagram sensations. So there's all these navigations that people have to make in their career. And so the high street was the only way as a stylist you could make money in this country, although you might get editorial. But it's not the same as living in, say, Paris or certainly New York or Milan, which are the other big cities for the sector. And then I realised that I needed to start setting up meetings. So I did another one with the BFC with Matt Hancock, and then when I left Parliament I decided to set up Fashion Roundtable. Sarah Moa came to our launch event and we just basically did a lot of events around our 3 pillars, and so we looked at Brexit but also education, representation and sustainability. I then was asked to set up I've got 2 all-party parliamentary groups, so they were all dormant. So that's another thing. There was nowhere for me to go to communicate the issues of the sector within Parliament because the groups that were dealing with it were dormant. So that was another issue.
Question. So for the general person who doesn't understand how politics works, now I need you to explain a little bit as well for me. Now I understand that you have Fashion Roundtable, which lobbies as, what is a secretariat? Can you just clear that?
So a secretariat is another one of these kind of old words. It's an old word for basically the organisation. So the secretariat will be the people that bring together all of the stakeholders, all of the interests,
You
create
have
the
to.
agenda,
Yeah.
create work on the written and oral questions and that go from the members of that APPG. So they're the people that basically they're like a content director.
Yeah.
And a managing director.
Okay, so that's what you do. And your three pillars are education, sustainability, representation, and inclusion. So, and you lobby Parliament to get things heard and policies passed. Is that a
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways you do it. So the APPGs work on working with your members, your parliamentary members.
Yes.
And we have a very strong connection with our APPG members. For instance, the meeting I just had this morning had four parliamentarians. If you think this is the week of the Brexit negotiations, that's good.
So you had that this morning. It was for the future of fashion retail.
Yeah, and that was yeah. So basically, you have your parliamentary members who then you, by sharing information that's coming from stakeholders, we do weekly updates for the ethics and sustainability one every Friday, so they get all the content, all the news, and all the basically lobbying pitches from stakeholders.
Yeah.
We equally, aside from that, through Fashion Roundtable, we work with the government. So we work with Whitehall. So we go, I'm on the updates from Whitehall. At the moment, I'm telling them what I think about the anomalies in how the film industry is being treated versus the fashion industry.
Yes.
The impacts of the end of the VAT retail export scheme, which would put an end to a tourist being able to get their VAT back, which quite frankly is going to decimate the luxury market in the UK and heritage brands. And if you want to make Paris and Macron's day, do that. Go ahead with that idea. So there's lots of things where I kick back through the lens of Fashion Roundtable, and that's working with government. Also, when the pandemic was happening, I was on roundtables with the Cabinet Office about PPE, about trying to get more PPE made in the UK, and bringing in stakeholders. They didn't always listen, and now we're on, I think, the fourth or fifth incarnation of that group of people from the Cabinet Office. But I definitely pro bono made my thoughts heard.
So you are the person the government come to understand what to do with fashion?
I think so, increasingly. I mean, they've obviously got other stakeholders, and we're newer. They've got the tried and tested formulas. Whether those have worked, I think, is debatable, because there's definitely been a lot of room for me to manoeuvre in.
Yeah, and so the things I see that I want to get on to sustainability, because Save Your Wardrobe, that's hosting us today, who I work with, is a platform that allows people to save their clothes in a digital format and use them more, because we can't continue to keep buying more. And it's kind of having your clothing on the scroll rather than buying on the scroll. So it's limiting the amount of, it's usership versus ownership, essentially. Now, but the, sorry, I just lost myself there. The sustainability part we'll get to, because we want to talk about the audit committee's rejection of the 18 points that happened 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But before that, let's get a few dichotomies that are going on between fashion and government at the moment. So we've got the fashion industry is worth 35 billion. The fisheries are worth 1 billion, yet there's no real action talking about fashion. Film is on the agenda, fashion is not on the agenda. How is it that these huge gaps take place? Why is it?
So I have this week taken the filter off what I think back to the government, because I'm actually I've got annoyed. And the reason I've got annoyed is, so my husband works in the film industry, and I'm really happy that it's considered a critical industry. And of course, when he this week did a Macmillan Cancer advert, arguably that's a critical, but when he did an Alexander McQueen film, was that critical? When he did a Dettol advert last week, was that critical? The cat food advert he did last week as well, was that critical? No, it wasn't. Why can you do hair, makeup and film for moving image, but you can't do hair, makeup, film for stills for fashion? Why is one sector that's worth 2 billion worth more to the UK than the fashion industry? Why are we touted out as a soft power every time they want to talk about, a glossy industry? We are the largest component of the creative industries, and we have been consistently undervalued. And that is not just from politicians. That is also from people leading in policy. That is also from NGOs and from people working in trade bodies, and it's got to stop, Mel. I'm literally sick of it, because I think it comes down to people making gendered decisions around policy, and I really have come to that conclusion after a few years in this. And this week, I have finally said something to people, because you've got the SOL, which is the shortage occupation list, which will impact on workers in factories when we've been at capacity pre-COVID, who are generally women. When we've got the VAT retail export scheme, which, as I've said, if you want to decimate the market and make everyone go to Paris and Milan, go ahead with that one. If it was me, I wouldn't just be doing it for non-EU tourists, I'd be doing it for EU tourists. Let them come here. We want our tourism, we want our hospitality, and we want our retail to flourish. That is not the right policy. The shopper is a canny shopper. That international shopper that comes from China, as we heard from Paul from the Association of International Retailers, they know their numbers. And they don't just go to one country when they come on their European tour. They're a bit like the reverse of the traditional European tour that we used to do and the Americans used to do in the 19th century. They do it the other way, and they go to all these cities and they go to all these places, and they will just limit their time if they can even be bothered to deal with the Eurostar queue post-Brexit.
Exactly, and they're saying the government think they're saving money, but the amount of jobs that will be lost, the amount of money that will be lost, the amount of tourism that will be lost, hospitality, it doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, because the government's basically worked on really limited facts, which the OBR have said are flawed. And not only that, the people running all of the airports are saying this is going to be a problem. So this is a problem for jobs in Aberdeen, Manchester, Brighton. It's not just what they've been saying, which is a Bicester, Mayfair, don't worry about the luxury market, which has been their argument. I'm saying that's your tourist that goes to Liverpool to buy Beatles memorabilia. That's your Johnstons of Elgin want to go to the flagship store. That's everybody in the economy. And also, if you want to build back better, which is the buzzword, then do it by supporting jobs, especially in a difficult time, because those multinational retailers will just reduce their flagship stores in London, or pull out of Bicester and move to somewhere in Switzerland or Milan. But you won't have the resonance, which is what entices a tourist.
Yeah,
you can't just rely on the Queen to bring the tourist.
I'm glad to hear you're getting angry. There's all, because we need you to be angry. But the other thing that I found really compelling from one of your talks that you held last week with Show Studio was the close relationship between climate change and exploitation in fashion. And I was really interested for you to tell us a little bit more about that, because that's down to sustainability as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think all of these things are linked, and you could say, arguably, what is she going on about the VAT retail export scheme, and where does that link to the sustainability conversation? And I don't think it isn't unlinked, because if you don't support jobs, if you don't support jobs which are paid transparent living wages, whether that's in retail or that's in manufacturing, you end up with workers in unsafe working conditions. There are direct correlations between businesses that don't uphold safe working practices and sustainable business values. So you don't have someone making denim using, being careful about the dyes, being careful about the pollution, and then not paying their workers fair. The things go hand in hand. Modern slavery and environmental disaster issues they're one and the same. You have an issue where if we don't sort out the workers going on the SOL in the UK, but you want to build back better, you want to have more UK manufacturing, you will have workers being trafficked here. There are already massive signs of trafficking into the UK. Then you've got the issues of Bangladesh and the non-payments to the workers by companies who didn't want to pay for their orders. These companies are exactly the same companies in a lot of cases that are now floundering because of the decimation of the retail, but equally there's also been issues of the growth of exploitative practices in the UK, in Leicester, as we've seen with the Labour Behind the Label news that came out in the summer. So the thing is that those two issues go hand in hand, and it is consistently those marginalised women from whatever part of the world they are, but they are usually women of colour, and they are being undervalued, overlooked, and now we've got trafficking incidences where people are being trafficked into Leicester, where the policing are not noticing them for whatever reasons, which also highlights a series of issues about policing and observations of what marginalised people actually look like. And I've heard reports of a man who was trafficked into Leicester who couldn't pay because there was non-payments, and his brother was murdered in India. So it goes much deeper than you think.
I'm only beginning, I've got various interests, but because seeing you connect them all together, for example, when Pretty Little Thing was selling things for under 10p on Black Friday a couple of weeks ago, hearing you talk about that just makes me think, well, of course, you're paying 10p for something. Of course, the person that's been paid to make it will be underpaid. Of course, they're going to be working in bad conditions. And of course, that's because where they come from initially is underprivileged, and they probably had to pay someone dodgy just to get to this country. So all of it is all interconnected. Well, one of them, and I can see the more you get into this role that you're in, the more you must be seeing this web of connection going on. And I suppose the end result is, from a fashion perspective, it's looking at this overconsumption of things. And we had a conversation with an academic called Dr. Kate Fletcher 2 weeks ago. I was reading through, listening again to what she had to say. And, the kind of monoculture at the end of the chain of fashion is what people are consuming. So you've got people looking at Instagram and buying loads and loads of clothes, and ASOS's figures have quadrupled, and the fast fashion system is getting faster and bigger, even though loads of people are trying to stop and mitigate all the problems. And I guess that must be something that you looked at when the Environmental Audit Committee put forward 18 points, all of which were rejected 2 years ago. And
there were lots of political reasons why they were rejected. They were rejected because of Brexit, I think, primarily, because why are you going to put more regulations in place? But I think there's 2 points. First of all, the EAC did reopen that review.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I lobbied for that, and that happened, and I'm glad that it did. We submitted 2 pieces of evidence from both our APPGs, and I know that a number of other organisations did as well, or just people who felt like they wanted to, or educational facilities. The issue for the sector is bigger though than that. The issue is, in the UK certainly, is that there was only one committee looking at the fashion industry. So it goes much deeper than just worrying about why the EAC's 18 recommendations weren't picked up. It goes back to my point of, why aren't we in the conversation?
Yeah.
So BEIS, which has a committee, which is the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, I think that's the name for it, department. Basically, it looks at business. Their committee looked at exploitation for 1 day, and they had evidence from Anti-Slavery International, which is great. But I don't see enough work on, so, the Treasury Committee have been looking at the VAT retail export scheme, but the sector doesn't get enough attention. So this is the bigger issue, is yes, we can get annoyed about why all 18 points weren't picked up from Mary Cray's fantastic piece of policy work, but it has a new chair, Philip Dunn. They are looking at issues. I'm sure because he's in the Conservative Party, it will be more favourably received by the government. His researcher, Nick, is fantastic. I don't think that there won't be pertinent points from all the evidence. But the problem is we as an industry don't have enough places to put our thoughts. And we have, and this was the shocker to me, left it to other people who haven't done it properly or just not done it. And so a very valuable sector has been overlooked because it hasn't been crying out. Now, if you were the car industry, Jaguar Land Rover spent 800 million on lobbying in 1 year. I don't have a budget of anywhere a fraction of that to work with, and I'm one organisation and we're 3 years old, and I get policy through into people's faces. And I think the sector needs to get behind effective lobbying and advocacy, because trust me, other sectors are, the pharmaceutical industry, the trade unions, cars, other areas of business, the defence industry, all of them lobby very effectively. And I have a tiny budget, and I do shout quite a lot at people to make them hear. Not obviously physically, but I'm very effective at lobbying, and I'm 3 years old, and think what I could do with a budget that would actually get us change, because on the budget I have, I cannot affect the change that Jaguar Land Rover will. And why will that be important? Because you will see policies. My prediction on why I think we will, let's see what happens on Sunday, but I think we will get a deal is because of the car industry.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question. This session is called How to Be a Fashion Changemaker. Okay, so number one, I can see you are a fashion changemaker, and I can see, and I hope that people listening can also see, that it takes understanding what the problem is and how you can start to fix it where it needs to be fixed, which is with government. So what can we do? How can we get behind you, and how can we support you? I know that one of the things we can do is to write to our MPs, but how can we be fashion change makers? What can we do?
I think you have to think about what is it the issue that you're concerned about is, and for everybody it will be different. It might be the loss of the Department for International Development, for instance, and the fact that that's been subsumed into the Foreign Office, and that you believe that we should need to do more on international development in the current criteria that's been set. The target's going to be lower than 0.7% of GDP. It might be that, it might be the exploitation of workers in Leicester. It might be climate change. It might be empowerment for women in retail. It might be any number of things that are your personal touch points. At those points, then I would recommend that you go on what's called Hansard, and you put that word in. You Google Hansard. It's the part. It lists all the debates that have happened in Parliament, and then you can see who's spoken about it, and then you contact that person, or you look for organisations that are involved with that, and you in those issues, and you align yourselves, and you start to learn more about those different issues, whether that's through Chatham House, which is a policy think tank, or it's us, or it's the British Retail Consortium, and you have a look at, or it's UK and a Changing Europe that did on Brexit strategy, and they have events that are free, for instance, as does Chatham House, I think, and you can go on those online now that we're all in this world of being on the computers all the time, and you start to get into the groove of finding a like-minded community of people that will educate you and elevate your thinking. And equally, you do hold your MP to account. They're only there. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think being an MP is a hard job. It's long hours. It's not as easy as people think. It really isn't. You are dealing with party political systems which are based on very binary ways of thinking, which don't suit everybody, but there will be people within those organisations whose thinking you believe in. So first of all, you've got your own MP who has a duty of care to represent your views. Obviously, you're in Keir Starmer's constituency. I'm in Catherine West's. You write to them as your elected representative. But equally, if you go on Hansard, you will find people, and they might not be from the party that you personally feel an affinity for or a member of, but they will be speaking out on those issues. And then you could write to them and ask them for more support. And quite frankly, their researcher might have written that speech for them, and they will probably help you to get your point across.
That sounds good. Who do you think are the MPs that are most understanding of the situation that fashion needs more representation in Parliament?
I think that you have to realise that there are loads of people who are sorry, one second, my husband has got my computer in the Apple store, and he just needs me to send him a code. Sorry. 1 minute. I shouldn't read it out, should I? Right, done. 1 second. Say that again. Who do I think?
Who are our allies? Who are our allies?
Obviously, for you in the sustainability conversation, you've got the one Green MP, which is Caroline Lucas, who also sits in our ethics and sustainability all-party parliamentary group. You've got the members and usually the chairs or the co-chairs of any parliamentary group will have an interest in those topics. So Dr. Lisa Cameron is the chair of the Textiles and Fashion APPG, but she worked with the British Retail Consortium on their Fit to Trade piece of policy over the last couple of months. So I think that, for instance, is a great way to. She highlighted the issues in Leicester. Then you've got people like Baroness Lola Young of Hornsey, who I work with quite closely, who's been looking at the modern slavery issues from the House of Lords. And then you've got Catherine West, who is our co-chair, who is very aware that her constituency are very concerned about the climate crisis and the environmental impacts of the fashion industry. So you've got people like that. You've also got the Leicester MPs who are all very worried about what's been going on across the party, because Leicestershire tends to be Conservative. Leicester has been Labour and then has an independent MP as well, Claudia Webb, as well as Liz Kendall. So you've got lots of different people, but you can pick up on them on touchstones for different issues.
Yeah. Okay, I've got to wrap up shortly because I made the rookie error, get this, apart from not being able to do IG Live, was that my son finished school an hour ago for the entire year. So he's on a play date, but I have to actually scoot off to go and get him. But my last question to be, and I know that we'll come back to you to find out on progress. What can we join Fashion Roundtable?
Yeah, so we've got, I mean, you can just sign up and get our newsletter if you just, you have to opt in because of working with government. We have to have GDPR. I can't just say, I'll sign you in. We're not allowed to do that. Or you can become a member. And if you become a member, you get access to our deeper, more detailed policy and political insight. We do a monthly political intelligence. We do longer reads. We do more deeper dives into policy, so it's not just the lighter touch that comes. We do a bi-weekly newsletter. One is more kind of like editorial, which Lottie edits. One is the more policy driven one, which Heather edits, who's our researcher, but the deeper dive is what you get access to as a member.
And do you feel, just on the very last note, do you feel like the sustainability EAC thing, do you feel like we're on the cusp now with retail, like Topshop breaking down, having done your APPG on the future of retail today, do you feel there is change coming? Or do you feel like it's going to
let's see what comes out of the next few days with Brexit. I've been saying that for years, but I think Brexit will determine everything. The reality of a no-deal Brexit is a deregulated UK.
Yeah.
And that has impacts not just for the UK, but for the whole of the global supply chain. We are very, we could end up being that deregulated country outside of Europe, right next to Europe, so with access to Europe through Northern Ireland. So don't underestimate the cost benefits to a certain number of people by being on a no deal, and what that could mean to the sustainability and the workers' rights conversation. So I think you have to wait and see, and that's why you have to be alert.
Okay, well, Tamara, it's such a pleasure and such an honour to have you.
Oh, don't be
apologies
silly.
For the tech difficulties, but hey,
that's life. That's life in 2020.
Exactly, and I really appreciate it, and also thank you for all the work you're doing, because I know it's making a difference, and it's wonderful. So we'll catch up after Brexit and have a little bit of a debrief.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you very much for having me on. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.